Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for this Ducks in Tech webinar. I'm Megan McKinney, the Associate Director of the Duck Career Network in the UL Alumni Association, and I'm happy to be here with a panel of experienced Duck alumni working in the tech industry who will be sharing their perspectives on what it takes to build a diverse and successful tech company. They'll tackle a variety of issues around equitable hiring and recruiting processes and discuss how companies can commit to creating inclusive environments, resulting in more effective teams. I'd like to encourage our audience members to submit their questions for our panel throughout the event using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll be taking breaks throughout to share them with our panel. Our panel moderator is Nick McElveen, founder and managing director of Embarcatech. Nick holds a degree from the UO in journalism and communications. His career has spanned the mobile, e-commerce, fintech, and payments industries throughout the Americas and Asia. He is now working on startups in the fields of personal data privacy and renewable energy, while also advising companies in high-growth sectors. Nick, I'm now going to hand it over to you to introduce our fellow panelists and kick off the program.
Thank you, Megan. Duck in Tech's members are University of Oregon alumni helping other alumni in the technology industry, providing advice and experience in career growth, sharing industry knowledge, and creating networking opportunities. We want to make it easier for others to succeed. Ducks in Tech and the University of Oregon Alumni Association want to give back by helping you make better decisions in your job, for your organization, and for your career. This organization is about impact for good. The Ducks in Tech group addresses challenges in the technology field. That brings us to today's conversation regarding the tech hiring process. How do we build successful businesses with team members representing a broad set of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives? Today, we'll learn more about how innovative companies are leaning forward to evolve their recruiting programs to build more capable and more effective teams. In the short time we have together today, we will focus on creating equitable and accountable hiring processes, as well as fostering inclusive environments which enable long-term success for new hires. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Anitra Brown, Diversity and Inclusion Manager of Salesforce in the San Francisco Bay Area. Also joining us is Richard Harris Jr. of Union, a digital marketing agency. Richard is based in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. Richard and Anitra, welcome to Ducks in Tech. Just remind you to go off mute. Thank you both for joining us, and welcome. Let's start with our first question today. We'd like to get to know both of you a little bit more. Richard, starting with you, as you folks go off mute there, why did you choose the University of Oregon, and what's your story about joining U of O?
Yeah, I love that we got to kick it off with a softball here. Yeah, the University of Oregon, I think if you visit the university, it's going to be very hard to say that that's not the university that you're going to go to. I remember my first trip up. I was on a couple different official visits, and I came to the University of Oregon, just seeing the campus, seeing how beautiful it was, engulfed by the nature that surrounded it, the ability to see, so many waterfalls within a 15-mile radius around the University of Oregon just really inspired me to go to the university, and also inspired me behind my choice of major, joining the environmental studies and science school. So just nature alone brought me to the University of Oregon.
Thank you, Richard. And how about you, Anitra?
Yeah, for me, I think, well, a few things. One thing is, so I'm from the Bay Area, but I did spend my formative years in Indianapolis. And so I remember thinking as I was choosing a college that I wanted to get away from the snow. And so in my mind, I thought there was no snow in Oregon. I mean, to my surprise, we did have a couple of snow days, a couple of inches here and there. But so that's one of the reasons. But also, I chose Oregon to run track. And so I had been running track since I was 7, and it very much was a part of my life. And I had the opportunity to run for the University of Oregon from my freshman through junior year. So that's the real reason behind Oregon, but also the snow.
Fantastic. Richard, and turning back to you, would you mind walking us, the audience, through your career journey after you graduated, and tell us a little bit more about what you do today, as well as about your employer?
No doubt. So my career journey actually started while I was in school. After a couple years, things got very theoretical, right? When you're learning in classes, and we wanted to actually pursue the hard facts and the hard things that we're actually learning. So me and 3 other guys decided to co-found a marketing agency. We got an office building right above the Davis in downtown, and started working with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses down there, building websites and just kind of getting them started with marketing. Shortly before I graduated, I actually went up to Portland and started working for a marketing and advertising agency up there. Got a little homesick, missed Eugene a little bit, and got brought back down to Eugene to work for the Register Guard. Actually, that was in the middle of them transitioning into the RG Media company. So I kind of helped lead that push for them to go from, all print advertising to digital advertising. After that, my career took me to another really cool agency in Eugene called Lunar Logic. Worked there for many years, and then relocated down to Texas, where I got really strict into the data and analytics roles. I worked for 2 multinational agencies in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. One, I was doing a lot of engineering and implementation work, and then the other was strictly data science, so a lot of R, Python, and SQL. Just honed my skills in there, and then got an incredible opportunity to move out of Texas and move to Charlotte, North Carolina to work for Union. And I'm the data director here, so I'm building out our data practice, hiring constantly. And what Union does, we're a performance marketing agency. We like to say we blend the worlds of creativity and data together. We work with really incredible clients all over the US. Some that just immediately come to mind are like Pepsi, NRG, Volvo, and we work to kind of help them build their brands through creativity and data.
Got it. Thank you, Richard. And Anitra.
And for me, I think I had an interesting journey. I went to U of O, like I mentioned, to run track originally, but didn't exactly know where I would land career-wise. And so I definitely went through a little journey in terms of figuring out like, okay, this track thing isn't going to work out. What else am I good at? What impact can I make on the world? And I always knew that I wanted to help people, but I didn't exactly know what that meant or what it looked like. And so I went through a few majors, but eventually landed on sociology, which is what I got my undergraduate degree in. And also my senior year, I was, kind of figuring things out, and I was like, okay, I need to get an internship. I need to get some real world experience to build out my resume. And fortunately, I was, checking my email, and I saw that the Student Alumni Association, they had an opening for different student leadership positions. And so my senior year, I applied for the Director of Philanthropy and Advocacy, again, with this theme of like, okay, maybe I can help people, and absolutely fell in love with that work. I will credit the Alumni Association that, having that experience really opened my eyes into the nonprofit sector and allowed me to, find another way for me to channel some of these gifts that I was developing and, talents that I was learning about in my college career. And so that experience was really incredible. And then from there, I actually got my first job out of college at United Way of Lane County. So stayed in Eugene and was working with the team there on an early childhood education grant, and mainly just kind of supporting the program. And we were helping families get connected to early childhood resources and kindergarten. And we were really focused on expanding access for the different families in Lane County more broadly. And so through that work, I realized that there were a lot of families with varying backgrounds that just had different levels of access to our different programs and had different learning. The kids had different learning outcomes. When we're looking at their kindergarten readiness scores, we were finding that, families from lower income neighborhoods, their kids weren't performing as well. We also noticed that families of color, their children also weren't performing as well in the kindergarten readiness assessment. And it was enough at the time that the state really wanted us to do a racial equity assessment to understand how our programs can further support families of color. And so that really kind of launched my career into diversity and inclusion. I started that project curious and had no clue what to do or even how to organize a community around a project like this, especially something so sensitive and so complex. I mean, we're thinking, systems level issues here. But that was really an impactful project, and that kind of launched my career and helped me decide that I wanted to focus on diversity and inclusion moving forward. And that was my way that I could give back and support communities. And so I was at United Way for a few years, then ended up moving back to the Bay Area, where I started working at Lyft and doing a lot of internal diversity and inclusion programs. And so I mainly worked with our employee resource groups at Lyft. And most recently, actually celebrated my year anniversary yesterday at Salesforce, which is wild to think that it's been a year already. Time truly flies when you're at home on Zoom calls. But Salesforce is a tech company. So we are the #1 CRM platform in the world, I have to say that. And really what we do is we help companies connect with their customers through a variety of products that really focus on sales, service, e-commerce, IT, et cetera. And so that's the kind of the spiel on Salesforce. And what I do there is I work on our university recruiting team and really help the team think through, how do we create programming to support our diversity hiring goals, really with the goal of expanding access to underrepresented communities and expanding access into tech. And so we do a lot of work with historically Black colleges and universities. And we also do some really intentional programming, again, with that goal of expanding access and creating this inclusive work environment. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and what I'm working on.
Thank you, Anitra. I will come back to that last bullet point here momentarily. But first, I want to jump right into the meat of the topic today. And I'll stay with you, Anitra. What is unconscious bias in the hiring process? What do we need to be aware of in order to improve the hiring process to make it more inclusive? And finally, what steps can we take to counteract unconscious bias, again, in the hiring process?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a great way to start the conversation. And before I dive into, kind of how unconscious bias shows up in the hiring process, I do want to just level set about what unconscious bias is. And so when we think about unconscious bias, it's really the social stereotypes about certain people or certain groups of people that we create, kind of above our conscious. These are things that are out of our regular consciousness. And these sorts of associations or stereotypes, we do them for an intentional reason. They could be helpful in the sense that, our brains are working really hard all day. We're thinking about what we're going to cook for dinner. We need to memorize this material for our exams, or maybe, our talk track for our presentation. And so a lot of times we don't have a lot of extra brain space to also think about these complex issues like, who is this person that I'm seeing? Are they safe or not? Are they familiar? And so that's where these stereotypes come in. We use them as everyday tools to help us navigate our everyday world. And the place where these stereotypes or these unconscious biases can be harmful is when we're making assumptions about people that may not be entirely true. And that is where, when we think about unconscious bias in the hiring process, is when we really have to have some awareness and be mindful, because when we make these associations or when we make these assumptions about people because we don't know them or because of our limited experience with them, we can make harmful assumptions that could potentially exclude people from opportunities. Or we could make assumptions that allow us to kind of stay in our bubbles and our comfort zones and just only hire people that look like us. And so this may be, that because you went to U of O, all U of O grads are super smart and will get the job done. So that may mean that because of that, we're only going to hire U of O grads. which, it's okay, but we may be missing out on an opportunity to hire more people with even more incredible experiences and backgrounds. And so that's why it's really important in the hiring process to be mindful of how these unconscious biases show up and be really intentional about what sorts of processes or practices that we're putting in place to help mitigate those biases. And so I know Nick's going to lead me to an example that I've shared with the group a couple of times, and I definitely want to share with you all. So an example of this is, so at a previous employer, we were consulting with a tech company that just launched a software that actually does a scan of your job descriptions and kind of flags it for any sort of language that may be biased or not inclusive. And so, this particular company, we were, tech cutting edge. It's one of those things where, we're trying to be fresh and attract top talent. And so we use the word rock star in our job description because, we're looking for some cool, folks that are ready to take on challenges and be innovative and all those things, but it's like when I said the word rock star right now, I don't know what comes to your mind, but what came to my mind originally, I think of like Led Zeppelin or like maybe the Eagles or Elvis, somebody like that, which is fine, but those people don't look like me. And so in my subconscious, what could happen is that I see that example of a rock star and I'm like, okay, well, I don't look like Led Zeppelin, that group. Like, does that mean that I'm not welcome in this space? And those are associations that we make without even realizing it. And so that's why it's really important that every step of the process, even in terms of how we write our job descriptions, we're really mindful that the language is inclusive so that we're not unintentionally excluding people.
Mindfulness, the word of the day right there. Thank you, Anitra. Richard, what are your thoughts there about unconscious bias in the hiring process?
Yeah, I think it really does start with our job descriptions. That's formulating that. And Anitra really touched on that topic very, very well. But another thing I like to consider when writing job descriptions are the requirements that you're putting on that job description. Something we've noticed at my agency is the more requirements that we have, the less diverse candidates we often get, especially from a gender role delineation between the two. When we have a lot of requirements listed, a male would apply that has 3 of those 10 requirements, where a woman might not apply unless she meets 7, 8 of those requirements, even though they both have the same experience and background. So, thinking about how we're formulating these job descriptions, right, only being there and addressing what is absolutely necessary. I also think that where we're posting these jobs also would open us up to addressing the unconscious biases. So instead of posting them, on university job boards, which we often do, also think about where else we can be posting these job descriptions to try to meet people where they are, to try to get some more diverse candidates in our talent pool. I also think about the screening process as well. Who's doing the screening? What are they screening for? What are they looking for in these candidates? Then it all the way goes through to the interview process. So when you're sitting down and interviewing, some people might not interview as well as other people. Some people might not have parents that actually got into a corporate job where they can't bounce ideas off of them about the interview process. So thinking about how we're formulating these interviews and taking that a step further, I think I could throw out an example is I noticed that I spend a little bit of extra time in the interview process before I start interviewing someone. I go to their social media, not to disqualify them, but just to learn a little bit more about each and every person. So I can formulate my questions for them. We're hiring a junior analyst and we're really looking for someone that can just analyze data and understands dimensions and metrics and how they relate to each other. So with each and every person, I look at their background, and one guy I noticed was really, really into basketball, like was tweeting about his favorite team all the time. And I asked in the interview process to get his thought process behind analysis, like how would you argue that Kobe is a better player than LeBron or vice versa? Whatever your opinion is, just how would you argue that? What things would you point to? And then he stepped back in his chair and got really comfortable and started talking about plus minus and their 3-point percentage and their free throw percentage and points per games and wins. And that's exactly the type of thing we're looking for. We can teach the technical things, especially to our junior candidates, but making sure that they're comfortable enough to, answer these questions. If I asked every single person the same question in the interview process, we will get vastly different answers and think someone's unqualified because we're not really meeting that person where they are.
Thank you, Richard. While we're with you, I'll stay with you. How should we be, Richard, thinking about the definition of diversity in the workplace? What does that really mean to you?
Diversity in the workplace for me really means diversity of thought, diversity in background, and diversity of experiences. Of course, diversity in ethnicity, race, gender, assignment, and gender designations. Like, all of that makes a lot of sense, whether they're a veteran or not. All of that is diversity, but really it comes down to diversity of background for me.
Thank you. And Anitra.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar definition. I would say I very much have an expanded definition of diversity, and I really lean into intersectionality and think about the different ways that people show up based on their identities. And so I think we miss out when we limit people and put them in these boxes and say that, oh, this person's only a woman, or they're only a veteran, or they're only a mom. And it's like, they may be all of those things. And all of those identities really shape how they show up to work each day in their lens and how they approach their work. And so I do like to look at that expanded definition and think about, how can we create an environment where someone truly feels like they can bring their whole self, whether it's their hidden disability, or it's their parenting status, or, their mental wellness, but I think that expanded definition is really key, especially as we're thinking about how that, diversity really supports our building an inclusive workplace.
Thank you, Nitra. And I'll pose this question to both of you, whoever wants to raise their hand on this. How do we rewrite the preconceived notion of, quote, the best candidate, unquote? So when we set out to hire candidates whose beliefs, let's say, align with our mission, that is something that's very common. How do we avoid disqualifying people with different backgrounds?
I can go ahead and start off, Anitra, if you don't mind.
Nope.
This is one that really means a lot to me, looking for the best candidate. I think about when I was starting out in my career. I graduated from University of Oregon with environmental science and studies degree, minored in business, didn't have marketing experience, didn't have data analysis experience in my role, right? Where I went to school. And I wouldn't have been perceived as the best candidate or the most qualified candidate on paper when you're sifting through resumes. There's a lot of, you don't have to be just like this person or like a person that this person will hang out with to be considered the best candidate. We, at our company, we have people that have come straight out of boot camps that did not have a traditional career path that, are some of our best employees. One guy we hired in the UX department came right out of a boot camp. His preparation skills are out of this world. And I've never seen someone that's as passionate or prepares as much as he does when it comes to like client calls or client meetings. And that's a person that you might not think of as the prototypical best candidate, didn't go to an Ivy League or renowned college with a 4-year degree, doesn't have 3 years experience and had a bunch of internships while he was in school. All of those things don't really make up the best candidate. And I think we have to reshape the way we think about individual and best candidates, because when we hire, strictly for culture fit or strictly for the ability to fit the team, I think that kind of stifles diversity of thought. And that's what we're really trying to avoid.
I agree. And I think you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of really aligning to, or really just kind of meeting the candidates where they're at. I think to add, as we think about, because I feel like you have a really good perspective, Richard, from like the hiring manager perspective. And when I think about through my lens of HR, it's really that, the best candidate should be the one that demonstrates that they can, provide, or that they have the core competencies for the job. And I think so often we can get wrapped up in, is this person a good fit because maybe we're more comfortable with them, or they come from a company that we find very credible. But sometimes we lose the key elements in that, the purpose of a job interview should be to understand, like, how does this person demonstrate that they can meet the core competencies that we've outlined? And I think leading with that and being very explicit about, these are our core competencies, this is what we all agree to, then you don't leave any room for the discussion about, oh, did this person come from my alma mater? Is this person from a credible tech company that I'm super familiar with? Or do I like this person's personality? None of those questions really answer the important piece here, which is, does this person qualify to do the job? Do they have the skill sets? Will they be set up for success in this role based on their previous experience? And so I think it's really important for teams, whether it be from a hiring manager perspective or a recruiter or HR, to really have some clarity around what are those core competencies for each role, and leading with that.
While we're on this topic, I want to both encourage the audience to feel free to ask questions. We've got a few coming up, but before we jump to audience Q&A, I'd like to, while we're on the topic here of the quote, the best candidate, unquote, what's a better way to determine if a candidate can problem solve versus perhaps what's done commonly today? Either of you want to take that one?
We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's really about making them the most comfortable in the interview process. I think it comes down to that. Can a candidate problem solve? Let's think of a problem where that candidate might be passionate about that problem in that interview process. Like I said, I like to do, even though it takes an extra 30 minutes out of my day before every interview to do some online scraping about this person, getting something that they're comfortable about and having them talk about how they problem solve, whether this person is a woodworker. And, I might ask a question about, say you don't have this specific tool that you're looking for to do this job, like what other ways would you approach that situation? I think, it's worked really well for us in the hiring process, allocating that extra 30 minutes. I know a lot of people that are in hiring roles don't really have the time to do that, but I feel like every interview that I've had, I've gained something, as well as, the candidate gaining something, because I've gone the extra mile to get a little bit of better understanding of what they're interested in. And asking questions that relate to that to get the answers that I'm looking for, whether they can analyze data or problem solve.
I think to build on that, also just ask a real problem. Think about if you're hiring this person to solve a specific problem, it may be helpful in the interview process to say, hey, this is something that we're working on, or this is an area that we'd like this position to focus on. What are your thoughts on this? And hopefully in that experience, they can kind of share how they approach it, whether they have the answer or not. I think to your point, Richard, it's the approach that really demonstrates that this person has those competencies, or that they are capable of solving some of the problems that may come up within a role.
Thank you. Janine from the audience asked, what other suggestions do you have about where to post to get a more diverse pool of candidates? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, some places that we like to post our jobs are in those boot camps, those people that are taking a different approach to getting core competencies around the role. We also like to post on HBCU job boards. Whenever we're posting on job boards, we want to make sure that they're, we post on UNC Charlotte's job board, we post on Spelman's job board as well. We want to be everywhere where our candidates might be at.
And to add to that, in addition to posting on HBCU job boards, or also HSI, so Hispanic Serving Institutions, also there's different companies out there that do strategic sourcing, diversity sourcing, like JobWell, for example. They're a great resource that previous company that I worked for partnered with, but also to consider like non-traditional places to post jobs. I think we've done the traditional things and we've gotten the same results. And so this may be an opportunity for you to really expand your idea of where talent may be. And maybe it is that you partner with a community organization that is engaging with the community on a regular basis and can help get the word, out for you. Also leveraging referrals. Like, how often do we tap into our actual community of employees and ask them if they have friends or former colleagues or, folks that they went to school with that may fit the positions that we're looking for. So I would encourage you to continue to post on job boards, expand, make those connections, but also leverage your internal community of employees for additional leads as well.
And while we're on this subject, Mitra, what are some high return on investment activities to improve the hiring process to build a more diverse and successful teams? Do you have any real world examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think, of course, like high return on investment, I feel like is a little relative depending on, how you define that and when you want to see the results. But I do feel that I guess I'll preface this by saying that I think diversity and inclusion work, we're undoing hundreds of years of systemic oppression. This is going to take time to do this work, and we will not see results overnight. So I think for those who are, kind of starting your journey and you're working with your executives or working with your employee resource groups, know that this takes time. So you may not see the fruits of your labor tomorrow. It might take a couple of years, but knowing that over time, you will start to see results if you keep doing the work and keep getting feedback. But an example that I will share of a way that you could potentially get a return on investment is thinking about, so this is a pipeline development example. So for example, let's say that you want to expand access to opportunities to tech, and you're noticing in your pool that, okay, we're working in this community. Let's say we're looking for talent in a certain area, and we're noticing that, we're not finding people as we're looking on LinkedIn and we're connecting with our partners, we're not finding the talent that we're looking for. One opportunity is that you can consider is, how many people, what is the potential pool of people that you can pull from for a specific job rec or job function? So thinking like software engineer, for example, how many qualified software engineers do we even have in this area to be able to pull from? And if we find that, we're in a certain community, we're trying to hire for software engineers, but we're not finding them, then you might want to consider like, okay, so do we source talent from outside of the area and maybe convince them to relocate through bonuses or through other incentives to get them to come into the community? Or do we, even take a step back and look at maybe our high school talent? Is there an opportunity for us to partner with a local high school and help build their STEM program so that those students are more ready to apply for college and get STEM majors, and then maybe eventually ready to, join our company for internships and early talent career or more junior level roles? And so I think it does take that level of creativity as we're undoing, hundreds of years of systemic oppression that have kept communities out. It's really important that we're also mindful that it may require us to do some development work and reinvest in those communities so that they have the resources they need to be successful and have a fair shot or equal access to opportunities in tech specifically. So I know that was a lot. That was probably long-winded, but there's tons of ways to do this. I think it really does boil down to how much of an investment are you willing to make, and are you willing to wait it out to see the return in your investment?
I actually really like that.
Beautiful, Anitra.
Yeah, I love that example. And believe it or not, I'm dating myself, but I got my start in the mobile industry. A company had a strong relationship with my high school. That's actually how I got my start in the industry, and it had the biggest effect on my future career than probably anything else that I've done before or after. So I love that example. Richard, did you have anything else there? I want to make sure you had.
We're in a, although we're leading this panel, we're always learning, right? So in preparation for this panel, I was just, I'm a data guy, so I was just pulling some numbers, especially related to ROI, and I just have a couple of tidbits I think are really good to share here. There's a few different, if you want the sources to these just hit me up. You have my information on LinkedIn. I mean, I can share that with you. But one of the big stats that jumped out to me was 43% of companies with diverse boards enjoy 2 to 3% more cash flow per employee. So just making more money per employee by 2.3 times, sorry, not 2.3%. Diverse management increases revenue by 19%. That one's straight from the Boston Consulting Group. And the last one is that diverse companies are 70% more likely to enter the new markets that they're pursuing. So if you want to talk about ROI, I always think about numbers, and they're right in front of us.
And if I could add, I think knowing that we know now through research that having more diverse and inclusive companies lead to better employee retention, which ultimately saves money. The less time we have to spend offboarding and hiring more employees, the more time we can spend doing the core of our work, whether that's in the nonprofit sector, for profit, making money, whatever the case may be. So it's also considering that, by doing this intentional work now and creating that inclusive environment, your employees are going to be more likely to stay and be invested in their work and produce better work. So all around, I just think there's nothing but positive things as to why we should be prioritizing diversity and inclusion in our work.
Oh yeah, that brings me to another thing that I remember reading months ago that said 76% of Glassdoor people on Glassdoor said that diversity and inclusion is a major point for them saying yes to a job offer. If that company had a diverse background, if they saw diversity in the interview process.
Believe it.
So it's pretty incredible.
One of the questions from the audience to both of you was from Sandra. She is working for a startup and she's the head of people and culture. She's going to soon be going on a hiring spree, and will be staffing a lot of software engineers, developers, and data scientists. She asks, what are the things employees in this field value from their employer, and how would a company successfully retain talented folks in this field?
Yeah, working in this field, it's kind of a dog-eat-dog world out there. There's a lot of people that want data scientists, especially right now. We've been going through it, so offering competitive salaries is a really big point here. I had a person on my team that we hired him, and then no more than 6 months later, he had like an offer that was almost double the amount of money that we offered him at that point. Wow. So it's crazy. It was going to be like a $40,000 a year bump over what the promotion that we were offering. So competitive salaries are big. Consistent reviews for these employees, because us in data, we often operate in a silo from a lot of the rest of the company. A lot of us won't get in front of however many people we have on this call today and have this conversation because a lot of us aren't built this way. So having consistent reviews with employees, making sure that they know that they're valued. I like to try to have just a monthly touch base with the people that are on my team, then at least have a review every 3 months where we dive into like everything that's going on and making sure that they understand that I see what they're doing and that they're valued to this company. Having a lot of coaching moments in the data field, there's always something to learn, and things are always evolving, whether or not it's whether we're using Matplotlib and we're moving to PyPlot in Python or R, just having a lot of those coaching moments, bringing new things to the forefront. Allowing people in this industry to fail is another one that I think of, because you don't want them to make mistakes, but allowing there to be some elasticity for failure. If they make a mistake, that it turns into a coaching moment instead of being berated, because that's very common in this industry. And then I think the last one is celebrating achievements. We have this award called the Kick-Ass of the Week, and we just give it out to someone that gets nominated by a bunch of team members that you're the kick-ass this week, and that really hits home for them, even though it's I hope hopefully none of my employees are on this call, but you essentially, you don't get anything besides, just getting recognized in a weekly meeting. And that goes a really long way for a lot of the people, big smiles on their faces in those meetings. They talk about it throughout the week. So celebrating achievements. That felt very prepared, but I was ready for that kind of a question.
I'm glad you were. I think just to add a few, even though you covered most of them, so I feel like I don't need to add too much, but I will say that also consider your audience. I missed in that question specifically who the level was or the target for that particular batch hiring that they were talking about. But I will say consider your audience. And, if you're thinking about more junior talent, folks who are maybe fresh out of college or early in their career, you could maybe align that to a particular demographic and think about like Gen Z. What is Gen Z interested in? I know just from being in the university recruiting space that Gen Z, very similarly to millennials, is very, they're very socially conscious and aware. So in the competitive market that we're in, where for tech talent, they're getting offered, kind of 40% increases in pay than what they have historically. We have to bring more to the table than money. And so consider, what are the specific interests that a particular group or particular generational group may have, and how can you kind of lean into that during the hiring process? And so maybe it is bringing a couple of your employee resource group members along in the hiring process and allowing them to connect with your talent to really demonstrate how inclusive of a company culture you have, or what it's like being a part of your women's ERG, for example. Another thing that I would really offer to you too is to look at, if you collect exit surveys for your employees that leave the company, look and really, evaluate your exit surveys to understand what your current company climate is and why people are leaving. Because often, if it's anonymous, people will probably share why they're leaving. And even if it's, they're getting better pay or they have opportunities to grow, or maybe it's other things just about, manager issues or company climate. I mean, whatever those things are, really look for those trends and see if there's ways that you can start to put some policies, practices, or programs in place to help mitigate some of that. I think we don't tap enough on our employee base because they really are, kind of our live feedback loops. They're the ones that are doing the work every day. They're experiencing our company. And so we really should be leveraging our employee voices as much as we can in terms of understanding what the experience could be like at a company and what makes our company special and unique that would make someone else excited to join us.
Thank you, Mitra. Switching gears here for a moment, and again, I want to encourage the audience, feel free to ask questions. We're coming up to the last 15 minutes of the session, so I want to make sure that some audience members are able to ask more questions. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can today. And now, again, switching gears, how can job seekers from underrepresented communities ensure they get a fair chance, number one, at getting hired, and number two, being given a fair chance to succeed at work and in their careers? How can we set them up for success?
I honestly think in terms of creating a fair hiring experience, I think the onus is on the company. I don't know that the onus is on the individual candidates, because I think that what would deem something fair really depends on, kind of what practices are in place that would make it fair and inclusive for everyone to have access. And so I would kind of flip that back to the hiring managers and the recruiters and the folks that are really involved in the hiring process to evaluate your process and make sure that it's as inclusive as possible. But I will say to job seekers, be confident in your skills and know that you deserve to be here, even if you're the only person who looks like you, and know that regardless of that, you're still worthy, you're still valuable, and be confident when you go into spaces, and also too, use this as a moment to ask a company about their diversity and inclusion practices and the work that they're doing in real time. I think as job seekers, sometimes we forget that we're interviewing the company just like they're interviewing us. And so it's completely valid to ask, how many women do you have in leadership? what does that experience look like? Or what sort of opportunities do I have for mobility and growth? Or how many people of color or members of the LGBTQ plus community do you have? How are you supporting veterans in the workplace? Those are all fair questions, and I think they should be on the table as you're evaluating the next place where you're going to grow and develop and share a lot of your time and talents. So I would offer that to job seekers as well.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, throw your hat in the ring to your be confident statement. You see a job that, you don't cross everything off their list with what they're looking for, don't be afraid to throw your hat in the ring. You really don't have anything to lose at that point. So be confident and share it. Don't be afraid to ask for mentorship. That's something I really leaned into heavily right as I graduated and was trying to get into the data and analytics industry. Talking to people that were already there and what they were doing, finding out what those industry leading tools are from my mentors, going back home and stacking all the certifications I can on Google Analytics and Tag Manager, and going through as many certification programs I could through Data Camp and W3 schools. Find out what they're using on a day-to-day basis, and try to get that information. We have a really strong alumni network, I think, and there were people that I never went to school with that I reached out to on LinkedIn just because we both went to the University of Oregon, and they're more than happy to share what they were using on a day-to-day basis. And that kind of helped me understand like what tools that I needed to grow in or get stronger in, like using cloud storage and SQL for my career technically. But for anybody that's looking to get into tech, there's different tools, there's different things that you have to be competent with to even be thought of as a qualified candidate. So don't be afraid to reach out for help. And I'm saying that for myself as well. If you have any questions about this industry, don't be afraid to reach out.
And I would also like to extend that as well. I can think of when I moved to the Bay Area, and I had mentioned I was working in the nonprofit space, moved out here and became interested and curious about tech. There were people who were willing to take coffee chats with me for exploratory conversations where I was like, hey, what is a recruiting coordinator? What do they do? Is that a good fit for me? And, kind of helping me navigate and understand where I was supposed to be, because there also was, I think there was I got lost, or things got lost in translation as I was trying to translate, how do my nonprofit skills translate to these technical roles or these roles in a tech company? And I had a lot of transferable skills, but I did have someone who actually helped me and looked at my resume and was able to help me kind of translate my transferable skills so that a tech recruiter could read them and be excited about my application. And so I would kind of put that out there too. I think +1 to what you're saying about seeking mentorship, but also to, folks who are in a position to give, be a mentor and be willing to take that coffee chat. I know we get a ton of LinkedIn messages all day, all the time, but I think it's always worth it to invest as much time as you can in helping to uplift the people who are coming after you. So I would also just encourage everyone who's in the position to be a mentor, to take that on, even if it's something as simple as a 30-minute coffee chat. That can go a long way in terms of supporting someone's trajectory.
I agree with that, especially the Ducks in Tech group on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I encourage you folks to use that as a resource. The people that are involved in that organization, in that group, are there not just because they're interested in tech, but they want to give back as well. So I encourage you folks to reach out, not only us on this panel, but really everyone in the organization. Use your network and build your network as a resource. There are a lot of people out there that want to help people and are not looking for anything in return. That's very, very much so. And that actually, that touched on an example. Sierra actually asked in the audience, what advice do you have to help someone that is a new grad that is trying to prepare for an interview, perhaps in your roles, Richard and Anitra and Richard, someone that's trying to prepare for maybe a role that you're hiring, maybe a little bit more recently out of school. Any advice on how to prepare and how to best set themselves up for acing that interview?
Yeah, going into an interview, the number one thing is confidence, or a fake confidence that you have to put on. Whatever it is that you do, I have a thing that I used to do before interviews was standing like Superman, and I'll stand like Superman, hands on my hip, chest out, head up, just to get myself, in the mode that I'm confident and I deserve to be here. Because when you're interviewing, there's, being too timid is going to, send a lot of people off, or turn a lot of people off from bringing you on board. Have some really good questions. That's another one. I interviewed today, and one of the things that got me about this interview was the woman I interviewed didn't have any questions about the company or the role or what the day-to-day looks like. So make sure that you review the website, review whoever might be interviewing, use LinkedIn, make yourself known on a lot of different levels to have those questions. I love when I'm about to have an interview and I see that person viewed my LinkedIn profile 5 minutes before. That makes me, think that this person's actually looking into it and preparing for this role. And then once you're in the interview, just try to be as comfortable as possible. I personally try to make all of my interviewees feel as comfortable as possible by trying to meet them where they are, like in terms of, the questions I ask or the topics we talk about. But just try to make yourself comfortable, because you're going to show your best self if you're comfortable, and that goes a long way as well.
And I would add two things. I think first, especially through this lens of us talking about the tech world, leverage your recruiters. I think that was something that I realized really quickly once I started interviewing for tech roles, was that I think the difference between interviewing in the nonprofit space versus in the tech space is that more often than not, there's recruiters that this is their full-time job to help candidates through the interview experience. And so that recruiter is going to have some of the best insights in terms of how you can show up the best for your interview. So leverage your recruiter, ask them, hey, I'm meeting with the hiring manager next, or the director of this team. Do you have any tips or any recommendations on things I should focus on in my interview? And sometimes they'll tell you, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Sometimes they won't, doesn't hurt to ask. I would also say too, in terms of the readiness and the being prepared, also know that it takes time, and so the first time I interviewed for a job was a lot worse than a more recent time that I've interviewed for a job, and I think that you'll have these moments. Sometimes you'll have great days, sometimes you'll have bad days, but the more that you practice interviewing, the more comfortable you'll be. And especially as you get a little further in your career, you won't have to prep so much in terms of trying to come up with the answer, but you'll genuinely be able to speak to your experience, which will also show up in your interview because you'll be more confident. So I know that's not helpful for the right now for the new grad question, but I would just encourage you to just keep trying, keep grinding, and taking those interviews, and leverage the resources that you have around you as much as you can.
Thank you, Nitra. And we're of course always short on time in a very important topic. How do we encourage people in underrepresented groups to pursue and succeed in the tech industry?
Yeah, I think we've touched on that a few times, but it's, put yourself out there. I think most of the responsibility, I will say, falls on companies to create those opportunities and expand access. And I think, when you have a recruiter reach out to you on LinkedIn, or if you see those opportunities, go for it, try it, why not? And the more that we continue to put ourselves out there and go for it and try it, the more that will be represented in tech, and the more inclusive those spaces will be. So again, I would just encourage, if you do have a desire to get into the tech space, leverage your network and continue to put yourself out there for those opportunities.
Thank you.
And as Anitra said earlier, and I'm not going to say it as eloquently as she put it, but it's just going to take time. And I think representation overall matters. So you taking a little effort right now to bring in a more diverse candidate into this tech field is going to encourage other people to say, hey, that now that I'm finally seeing people in that industry that look like me or come from a background like I came from, they're more inclined to see that as an opportunity that they can get themselves into as well. So yeah, it's going to take time, but I think what we're doing right now is going to help influence that in the future.
And one question we had from the audience, Cynthia, was asking more about trends for younger job seekers in the age of 17 to 25-year-olds. What are they most interested in designing and working on, generally speaking? For example, are they into designing apps, smart cards for social justice, entertainment, finance? Have you spotted any trends that you folks are seeing on a day-to-day basis that they're interested in working on?
I just have one thing.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry.
No, go for
I
it.
know that Generation Z really wants to do stuff that matters. Working with brands that are making a difference, or at least trying to make an impact, is big. That's a question I get asked often, like, what brands do you work with that do something or make something matter? And lots of times I'm like, I'm at a loss, right? But they're really, that's been a consistent question I've been getting in interviews.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, I don't want to misspeak and give you a bunch of fluff. I can share some of the resources that I use to do that sort of research. But yeah, I don't want to misspeak on specific trends because I don't know exactly.
Fair enough. Well, we have one more question, which actually is very close to Helena. She asked a very similar question. This is our last for today. When it comes to inclusion, how do we foster an environment where people who come from different backgrounds know that we value their ideas? How do we value the individual and what they bring to the table?
I think your actions reflect that. So as a leader, I'm not sure what perspective this question is coming from, but as a leader, are you creating space for people to share their feedback and their opinions? Like, do you actually ask your team what their thoughts are on a project, or, kind of how things are going? I think our actions every day give those signals, whether it's, in our subconscious or our conscious. Our everyday actions give the signals about what sort of environment we're creating and what's important to us. And so I think for me, when I come into a company and I see that there's employee resource groups that have budget, that are actually doing work and making an impact, they connect with senior leaders and they're making a change. That's a visual signal to me. They're like, okay, there's something going on here. That's great, or a leader asking me for my feedback directly on a project, I think is a clear indicator that you value my opinion. And so I think it's our everyday actions that we do that demonstrate that inclusive culture.
Thank you, Nitra. Richard?
Just a couple here. I would say allow them to be heard. That's a big one, just because if you don't create an environment where everybody feels like they can be heard or can speak up, having a diverse team with diverse backgrounds is not going to make your company, move forward or better, actually lean into what you've been trying to accomplish. Allow them to make mistakes. So, it makes people more comfortable when they can make a mistake on paper and then you don't harp on them for it. That allows them to be able to speak up more. I mean, if you think about raising your hand in class and the teacher tells you that you're wrong, versus like kind of berates you for it or laughs at it or scoffs at it, that's going to make you not want to speak up in the future and kind of bring that to the workforce. Allow people to have completely different opinions than maybe you or the rest of your team have, because it's very easy if 3 of the 4 of us have one way of thinking and we want to pursue this path. Someone speaks up and has a different opinion, it's very easy for us to write it off and go majority rules. Allow those other opinions to be heard and foster that. And then embrace confrontation. I think is the best one. Allow it to be healthy confrontation, allow those contrasting ideas and express how much having those contrasting ideas matter. Lots of times when we get into like whiteboarding sessions together, we kind of open it up like, let there be contrasting ideas, let there be healthy confrontation. So that allows people to speak up and, know that everybody else is going to be speaking up as well.
Any final thoughts?
I'm just thankful for this space and the conversation. This is such important work, and I think it's work that can't be done in silos. And so for everybody who showed up today, kudos to you, and please reach out if I could be a resource at all. But I'm just thankful for the conversation, the platform, and excited to keep doing this work.
Thank you, Nitra.
I've learned quite a bit from, just meeting with Anitra over the last couple of weeks as we prep for this.
Learn from you so much too.
As well as Nick, just real good questions that he asked in these conversations. So just constantly know that you're going to be learning. You're never too old to learn, never too young to teach.
Absolutely.
So that's really my big takeaway. And then, as an Oregon alum, I just want to let all of you other Oregon students or alums know that my door is always open. I have an open door office policy on LinkedIn. So if you want to shoot me a note or ask a question, we're ducks of a feather, we flock together. So
go Ducks.
there it is.
Love it. Thank you to you both. This is an important topic that covers not only creating successful companies, but about what's doing right for humanity. That's all we have the time for today. Anitra Brown and Richard Harris Jr., thank you for joining us. We appreciate all that you have contributed, and we look forward to watching your continued success. And as a reminder to the audience, be sure to join the Ducks in Tech group on LinkedIn. Go to ducksintech.com to be redirected to our LinkedIn group page. Then click on Request to Join button. And our group is about building community. Once you are a member, we encourage you to invite other Oregon Tech alumni to join. You can post jobs, ask the group industry related questions, and network with other Ducks in Tech. And also special thanks to both Megan McKinney, Associate Director of the Duck Career Network of the University of Oregon Alumni Association, and also to Caitlin Elwood, Associate Director of Regional Engagement on the U of O's Advancement Alumni Engagement Team. Your help, both of you, in organizing this event is greatly appreciated. And finally, thank you to our audience members for joining this important conversation. Please join us again next time. Now, Megan McKinney will say a few closing words on behalf of the University of Oregon Alumni Association. I'm Nick McElveen with Ducks in Tech. Thank you again for joining us today.
All right, thank you, Nick. Gosh, what a great session. It is clear that to build a strong, thriving business, you really do need a team comprised of differing backgrounds and experiences and perspectives. And on behalf of the Alumni Association, I just want to thank our panelists for their contribution to these important discussions around diversity and inclusion. To our audience, I want to encourage you to connect with fellow attendees after this event is over. So please be on the lookout for a follow-up email next week containing a list of attendees who I hope you'll consider reaching out to in the spirit of networking to make new professional connections. And we'll also be providing you with a recording of today's webinar. And lastly, if you are looking for ways to get involved with the Alumni Association, I do encourage you to visit our website. We are going to pop the link into the chat box. So stop by and fill out a get involved form. You can also view a lineup of upcoming events, learn about our regional alumni chapter and affinity groups, and explore the benefits of membership. So with that, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week and go Ducks.